Beloved, this is not just another Wednesday. This is a divine appointment. It is airs 25 February 2026, and heaven has scheduled a moment of interruption in your life. Today, we step into a nice house pure AR for prophetic clarity, a spiritual recalibration where confusion is dismantled, distortion is silenced, and the voice of God becomes unmistakably clear in your spirit. There are seasons when the noise is louder than the instruction, when opinions compete with revelation, when fear tries to disguise itself as wisdom. But today we are declaring that every competing voice must bow, every mental fog must lift, every spiritual interference must be dismantled. This is the day you hear God without confusion. This is the day divine clarity cuts through chaos like lightning through the sky. Prophetic clarity is not guessing. It is not emotional impulse. It is not wishful thinking. It is precision. It is alignment. It is your spirit synchronized with heaven's frequency. And when clarity comes, hesitation breaks. Delay dissolves. Doubt loses its vocabulary. You will no longer second guess what God has already confirmed in your spirit. Some of you have been standing at crossroads. You've been asking, Lord, is this you? You've been praying for direction about relationships, assignments, transitions, investments, ministry moves, and destiny decisions. And the enemy has tried to cloud your discernment with anxiety and overthinking. But today we issue a spiritual decree: confusion is illegal in your atmosphere. This prayer is atomic because it targets the root. We are not just asking for guidance, we are activating discernment. We are not just seeking answers, we are aligning with divine intelligence. We are commanding every internal storm to be still so that the whisper of God becomes louder than the chaos around you. Get ready. As we pray, mental clutter will clear, spiritual ears will open, your intuition will sharpen. The Holy Spirit will highlight what is from God and expose what is not. You will move from uncertainty to confidence, from hesitation to bold obedience, from questioning to knowing. Lean in, silence the distractions, position your heart. Because today, on this Wednesday, February 25th, 2026, we step into prophetic clarity and you will hear God without confusion. Silencing every competing voice begins with recognizing that not every sound deserves your attention. Every day you are surrounded by opinions, predictions, cultural narratives, internal fears, past memories, and emotional reactions that attempt to guide your decisions. Some of those voices are subtle, some are loud, some sound logical, some even sound spiritual. But if it did not originate from God, it has no authority to govern your destiny. When we speak about silencing every competing voice, we are not merely talking about external noise, we are addressing internal interference. The mind can become a crowded room filled with arguments, assumptions, and anxieties that talk over the whisper of the Holy Spirit. And if you do not intentionally quiet those voices, they will compete with revelation and distort divine instruction. Fear is often the loudest competitor. Fear disguises itself as wisdom. It tells you to play small, to delay obedience, to wait for more confirmation when God has already spoken. Fear replays worst-case scenarios in high definition and calls it discernment. But fear is not prophetic insight. It is a distortion mechanism. It amplifies risk and minimizes promise. It highlights obstacles and hides opportunity. When fear speaks long enough, it begins to sound familiar, and familiarity can trick you into believing it is truth. Silencing fear requires authority. You must confront it with what God has already declared. You must answer its accusations with divine promises. You must refuse to let it narrate your future. Then there is the voice of public opinion. In the age of constant information, everyone has advice, everyone has a perspective, everyone has a warning. Social circles, family members, colleagues, and digital platforms continuously release commentary into your atmosphere. Some advice is well-meaning but misaligned. Some counsel is rooted in other people's limitations. If you build your life on consensus instead of conviction, you will live beneath your calling. The voice of the crowd can never replace the voice of God. Crowds react. God reveals. Crowds respond to trends. God speaks from eternity. When you allow too many opinions to sit at the table of your decision-making, clarity becomes diluted. Silencing competing voices means removing unauthorized influences from your inner counsel. Another competing voice is the echo of your past. Past failures replay themselves like recordings. Old mistakes attempt to prophesy your future. Regret whispers that you are disqualified. Shame insists that you missed your moment. But the past does not have prophetic authority. It is a reference point, not a ruler. When the past speaks louder than God's promise, it creates hesitation. It convinces you that because something did not work before, it will not work now. Yet God operates in redemption. He rewrites narratives. He restores lost time. Silencing the past requires intentional renewal of the mind. You must separate what happened from what is possible. You must refuse to let history overrule destiny. Emotions can also become competing voices. Feelings are real, but they are not always reliable. You can feel overwhelmed and still be called. You can feel uncertain and still be chosen. You can feel afraid and still be equipped. If you make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions, you risk stepping outside of divine timing. Emotions fluctuate with circumstances, but God's word remains constant. Silencing emotional interference does not mean denying your feelings. It means refusing to let them lead. You acknowledge them, but you submit them to truth. You process them, but you do not enthrone them. Overthinking is another subtle competitor. The mind attempts to calculate every outcome, map every possibility, and predict every reaction. Analysis can be helpful, but excessive analysis can paralyze obedience. When you dissect a word from God until it loses its power, you create unnecessary delay. Clarity does not always mean exhaustive detail. Sometimes God gives direction without disclosing the entire blueprint. If you wait for perfect conditions, you may miss divine timing. Silencing overthinking requires trust. It requires surrendering the need to control every variable. It requires confidence that obedience activates provision. There is also the voice of comparison. Comparison studies someone else's journey and questions your own. It measures timelines, resources, influence, and outcomes. It asks why their path looks smoother or faster. But comparison distorts identity. It shifts your focus from assignment to imitation. When you compare, you begin to question instructions that were specifically designed for you. Silencing comparison means embracing uniqueness. It means understanding that your calling cannot be validated by someone else's metrics. God speaks to you according to your purpose, not according to another person's progress. Silencing competing voices is an act of spiritual discipline. It requires intentional stillness. It requires moments where you withdraw from distraction and recalibrate your spirit. You cannot hear clearly if you are constantly consuming noise. You cannot discern accurately if your attention is fragmented. Stillness is not weakness, it is strategy. It is the environment where revelation becomes distinguishable from interference. In stillness, distortion loses its volume. In quietness, clarity rises to the surface. This silencing is also an act of authority. You have the power to decide what influences you. You have the ability to reject thoughts that contradict God's promises. Not every thought deserves agreement. Not every idea deserves meditation. You can interrupt negative cycles. You can refuse internal narratives that diminish your confidence. You can declare that confusion has no residence in your mind. When you exercise authority over your mental environment, you create space for divine instruction to land without obstruction. Spiritual alignment sharpens when competing voices decrease. When fear is muted, faith becomes audible. When comparison is silenced, identity becomes stable. When public opinion is reduced, conviction becomes stronger. When emotional turbulence settles, discernment becomes clearer. The voice of God has not been absent. It has been competing with interference. The goal is not to make God louder. The goal is to make distractions quieter. Every major decision in your life will require this discipline. Crossroads demand clarity. Transitions require discernment. Opportunities must be filtered. Without silencing competing voices, you risk responding impulsively or hesitating unnecessarily. But when interference is removed, instruction becomes precise. Direction feels steady. Peace accompanies obedience. There is a difference between urgency driven by anxiety and movement directed by revelation. One produces exhaustion. The other produces momentum. Silencing every competing voice positions you to move with confidence. It fortifies your spiritual hearing. It protects your mental space. It guards your destiny from unnecessary detours. It strengthens your capacity to respond promptly when God speaks. And when the noise diminishes, you begin to recognize that clarity was always available, waiting for you to create the environment where it could be received. Alignment with heaven's frequency begins with the understanding that God is always speaking, but not everyone is positioned to perceive what he is saying. Divine communication is not random noise drifting through the atmosphere. It operates on a frequency of faith, obedience, and spiritual sensitivity. Just as a radio must be tuned correctly to receive a clear signal, your spirit must be calibrated to receive divine instruction without distortion. Misalignment creates static. Distraction creates interference. But when your heart, mind, and will are synchronized with God's purposes, clarity becomes natural rather than forced. Heaven's frequency is not governed by panic, pressure, or haste. It moves in divine timing. Often, the frustration you feel is not because God is silent. but because your internal rhythm is out of sync with his pace. You may be rushing while he is developing. You may be hesitating while he is commanding movement. Alignment requires surrendering your timeline in exchange for his strategy. It means trusting that delay is not denial and that acceleration will not come prematurely. When you adjust to heaven's rhythm, anxiety loses its grip because you recognize that every instruction has an appointed moment. Synchronization also demands purification of motives. If your desires are entangled with ego, validation, or comparison, your perception becomes skewed. Heaven's frequency operates from purpose, not pride. When your motives are refined, your discernment sharpens. You begin to sense whether an opportunity is an assignment or a distraction. You become sensitive to subtle nudges rather than dramatic signs. Alignment is less about dramatic experiences and more about consistent positioning. It is cultivated in daily disciplines: prayer, meditation, obedience, humility. These practices fine-tune your spiritual hearing so that when God speaks, you recognize the tone. Divine intelligence flows where there is submission. Resistance creates static. If you insist on clinging to preconceived outcomes, you limit your ability to receive fresh instruction. Heaven's strategy may contradict your expectations. It may stretch your comfort zone. It may redirect you from what seems logical into what requires faith. Alignment means yielding your understanding to a higher perspective. It means accepting that God sees dimensions you cannot perceive. When you trust his vantage point, you release the need to control every variable. There is also a corporate dimension to alignment. The voices you surround yourself with influence your frequency. Environments saturated with negativity, gossip, and cynicism can dull spiritual sensitivity. Conversely, atmospheres of faith and accountability elevate your perception. Alignment sometimes requires distancing yourself from conversations that contaminate clarity. It may demand boundaries that protect your focus. You cannot consistently dwell in confusion and expect precise revelation. The environment you cultivate internally and externally determines the quality of signal you receive. Obedience strengthens alignment. Each time you respond promptly to divine instruction, you reinforce synchronization. Small acts of obedience sharpen your responsiveness for larger assignments. Delayed obedience weakens momentum and introduces doubt. When you hesitate repeatedly, you begin to question your discernment. But when you move in faith, even in small matters, confidence builds. Alignment becomes a lifestyle rather than an occasional experience. You stop second guessing every impression because you have trained your spirit to recognize God's patterns. Alignment with heaven's frequency also involves emotional regulation. Turbulent emotions can distort perception. Anger, jealousy, insecurity, and unresolved wounds create filters through which you interpret guidance. Healing is therefore not optional, it is strategic. When your soul is restored, your discernment becomes clearer. You stop projecting past pain onto present instruction. You stop assuming betrayal where there is correction. Emotional maturity stabilizes spiritual sensitivity. It allows you to receive direction without defensiveness. Faith is the currency of alignment. Without faith, even clear instruction feels risky. Faith bridges the gap between revelation and action. It anchors you when circumstances contradict what you have heard. Heaven's frequency often communicates promise before manifestation. If you rely solely on visible evidence, you will misinterpret silence as absence. Faith enables you to hold steady when results are not immediate. It protects you from abandoning alignment due to temporary discomfort. Humility keeps the channel open. Pride insists that you already know. Pride resists correction. Pride rejects adjustment. But humility remains teachable. It invites refinement. It acknowledges that growth is continuous. When you remain humble, you remain flexible in God's hands. Alignment sometimes requires course correction. It may expose areas where your thinking needs renewal. Humility allows you to embrace those adjustments without shame. It understands that refinement is part of preparation. Patience is another essential component. Heaven does not operate under human pressure. When you are aligned, you are not easily provoked into premature action. You recognize the difference between urgency and readiness. You discern when a door is divinely opened versus when it is forced. Patience is not passivity, it is disciplined trust. It is the strength to wait without losing expectancy. In patience, clarity matures. In waiting, your character is fortified to handle what you are requesting. Alignment produces peace. Not the absence of challenges, but the presence of assurance. When you are synchronized with God's will, even difficult instructions carry a sense of stability. You may not see every detail, but you sense coherence. Confusion diminishes because your spirit resonates with divine intent. This resonance becomes your internal confirmation. It is subtle but steady. It does not scream, it settles. As you cultivate alignment, your decision-making shifts. You stop reacting impulsively. You begin responding intentionally. You measure opportunities against purpose rather than popularity. You evaluate relationships through the lens of calling rather than convenience. Alignment simplifies complexity because it narrows your focus to what truly matters. Distractions lose their appeal. Compromise becomes less tempting. You develop an internal compass calibrated by truth. Heaven's frequency is consistent, but it requires maintenance of sensitivity. Just as instruments must be tuned regularly, your spirit requires continual renewal. Daily communion recalibrates perception. Gratitude keeps your heart receptive. Repentance clears interference. Worship amplifies awareness of God's presence. These disciplines sustain synchronization. They prevent drift. Without maintenance, subtle misalignment can accumulate until clarity fades. When alignment is established, divine intelligence flows with precision. Strategies emerge that surpass natural reasoning. Solutions appear where obstacles once dominated. Creativity is unlocked. Courage is strengthened. You begin to anticipate guidance rather than chase it. You move with steadiness because your foundation is secure. Alignment transforms uncertainty into expectancy and turns hesitation into readiness, positioning you to walk in step with instructions that originate from eternity and unfold within time. Activation of discernment is the awakening of your spiritual senses to distinguish between what is divine and what is merely appealing. Discernment is not suspicion. It is not paranoia. It is not hypercriticism. It is the cultivated ability to perceive the origin, motive, and outcome of a thing before it fully manifests. It allows you to sense alignment or misalignment beneath the surface of opportunity, conversation, and decision. When discernment is activated, you no longer evaluate situations solely by appearance or emotion. You evaluate them by spiritual resonance and internal witness. Many people mistake impulse for instruction. An idea excites them and they assume it must be from God. An opportunity opens and they rush forward without examining its source. Activation of discernment slows you down long enough to test what you are hearing. It invites you to ask deeper questions. Does this align with what God has already spoken? Does this produce peace or pressure? Does this cultivate purpose or inflate ego? Discernment examines fruit before committing to the root. It recognizes that not every open door is divine and not every closed door is rejection. Emotional impulses can mimic spiritual nudges. You may feel strong attraction, intense urgency, or compelling enthusiasm, but emotions fluctuate and discernment anchors perception beyond temporary feelings. It evaluates patterns. It notices inconsistencies. It senses subtle warnings that logic might overlook. When discernment is active, you begin to detect when something feels forced rather than ordained. You recognize the difference between enthusiasm fueled by ambition and confirmation anchored in peace. This sensitivity protects you from costly detours. Deception rarely presents itself as obvious danger. It often appears polished, persuasive, and promising. It flatters your strengths and appeals to your desires. Without discernment, you may interpret flattery as favor and charisma as credibility. Activation of discernment equips you to look beyond presentation into substance. You begin to assess character, consistency, and integrity. You observe whether actions align with words. You measure promises against patterns. Discernment does not rush to conclusions, but it refuses to ignore red flags. Discernment is sharpened through intimacy with God. The more familiar you become with His character, the easier it is to identify what contradicts Him. Just as a person who studies authentic currency can quickly detect counterfeit bills, a believer who knows God's voice can quickly sense distortion. Intimacy develops recognition. When you spend time in prayer and reflection, your internal compass becomes calibrated. You begin to perceive subtle shifts in atmosphere. You notice when peace withdraws. You sense when conviction arises. These impressions are not random, they are signals. Activation of discernment also requires renewal of the mind. Cultural narratives, personal biases, and unresolved wounds can distort perception. If you carry unhealed trauma, you may interpret correction as rejection. If you harbor insecurity, you may misread healthy boundaries as abandonment. Discernment requires clarity of soul. Healing clears the lens through which you interpret events. As your mind is renewed, your evaluations become more balanced. You stop projecting past pain onto present opportunities. You stop assuming malicious intent without evidence. There is a difference between discernment and fear-driven suspicion. Fear expects betrayal. Discernment perceives alignment or misalignment without panic. Fear reacts impulsively. Discernment responds thoughtfully. When discernment is active, you do not feel the need to announce every concern. You quietly gather information. You observe patterns over time. You allow confirmation to build before making decisive moves. This patience strengthens wisdom. It prevents unnecessary conflict and preserves credibility. Activation of discernment also influences your relationships. You begin to recognize who sharpens your purpose and who subtly drains your focus. You notice conversations that inspire growth and those that cultivate doubt. Discernment helps you set boundaries without hostility. It empowers you to distance yourself from environments that compromise clarity. This does not mean isolating yourself from differing perspectives, but it means filtering influence. You choose proximity based on purpose rather than convenience. In decision-making, discernment becomes your internal safeguard. Before committing to a partnership, you evaluate compatibility beyond surface benefits. Before accepting a role, you consider whether it aligns with your calling. Before responding to criticism, you examine whether it contains constructive truth or manipulative intent. Discernment pauses you at critical junctures. It invites reflection instead of reaction. It encourages consultation with wise counsel when necessary. It protects you from making irreversible decisions based on incomplete understanding. Spiritual discernment also detects timing. An opportunity may be good but premature. A conversation may be necessary but not yet strategic. Activation of discernment enables you to sense when to advance and when to wait. Timing is as important as direction. Moving too quickly can sabotage preparation. Delaying too long can forfeit momentum. Discernment balances urgency with patience. It guides you to act when alignment is present and to hold back when clarity is incomplete. Discernment strengthens with obedience. Each time you honor a subtle prompting, your sensitivity increases. When you ignore repeated warnings, your perception dulls. Activation is not a one-time event, it is a continuous process. It grows through consistent attention to the Spirit's leading. Small obediences cultivate sharper awareness for larger decisions. Over time, you begin to trust the internal witness that confirms or cautions. Confidence develops not from arrogance, but from experience. Discernment also requires courage. Sometimes what you perceive may contradict popular opinion. It may challenge expectations. It may require you to decline opportunities others envy. Courage enables you to honor conviction over validation. It allows you to stand firm when clarity isolates you temporarily. True discernment may not always be celebrated by the crowd, but it will preserve your integrity and direction. When discernment is activated, confusion loses influence. You still gather information, but you are not overwhelmed by it. You still seek advice, but you filter it through alignment. You still evaluate options, but you are guided by an internal compass anchored in truth. You become less reactive and more intentional. You move with steady awareness rather than emotional volatility. Activation of discernment transforms how you interpret signals, how you evaluate opportunities, and how you respond to complexity, strengthening your capacity to navigate decisions with spiritual intelligence and unwavering clarity. Breaking the spirit of confusion begins with recognizing that confusion is not simply a lack of information, it is a disruption of clarity. You can have access to facts and still feel uncertain. You can receive advice and still feel divided internally. Confusion fragments focus. It scatters attention across too many possibilities. It magnifies options until decision-making feels overwhelming. When confusion dominates, even simple choices feel complicated. It clouds perception and weakens confidence, causing hesitation at moments that require boldness. Confusion often enters through overload. Too many voices, too many strategies, too many comparisons create mental congestion. When every option seems equally urgent, discernment becomes blurred. Breaking confusion requires narrowing your focus. It demands that you return to foundational truths. What has God already spoken? What aligns with your core assignment? What produces peace rather than pressure? By revisiting what is certain, you dismantle the power of what is uncertain. Clarity grows when you eliminate unnecessary variables. At crossroads, confusion intensifies because outcomes appear equally significant. You may fear making the wrong move. You may overanalyze potential consequences. The weight of decision can create paralysis. But breaking the spirit of confusion means refusing to let fear dictate your pace. It means acknowledging that not every choice carries catastrophic consequences. Some decisions refine direction rather than define destiny. When you release the illusion that one misstep will ruin everything, you regain freedom to move forward with trust. Confusion also thrives in double-mindedness. When part of you wants obedience and another part clings to comfort, internal conflict emerges. You pray for guidance while secretly hoping for a specific answer. You seek clarity but resist surrender. This tension creates instability. Breaking confusion requires wholehearted alignment. It calls for honesty about your desires. It invites you to lay preferences before God without manipulation. When your will is yielded, clarity becomes less distorted by personal agendas. There are moments when confusion is fueled by external pressure. Expectations from family, community, or culture can weigh heavily. You may feel obligated to choose a path that pleases others rather than fulfills purpose. External pressure can disguise itself as responsibility. Breaking confusion means distinguishing between obligation and calling. It requires courage to disappoint expectations when they conflict with divine direction. When you prioritize alignment over approval, mental clutter begins to clear. Spiritual warfare can also manifest as confusion. Sudden doubt, irrational fear, or persistent uncertainty may attempt to destabilize your confidence. Breaking confusion in these moments requires authority. You must confront intrusive thoughts and declare truth over them. You must refuse to entertain narratives that contradict God's promises. This is not denial of reality. It is alignment with higher reality. When you replace distorted thoughts with truth consistently, confusion loses its grip. Confusion often exaggerates complexity. It convinces you that clarity must arrive with exhaustive detail before action is possible. But sometimes clarity is incremental. You receive enough light for the next step, not the entire journey. Breaking confusion involves embracing progressive revelation. It means moving with what you know rather than stalling over what you do not. Each obedient step generates additional clarity. Momentum dispels fog. Emotional turbulence can intensify confusion. Anxiety, frustration, and disappointment distort interpretation. When emotions are heightened, perception narrows. Breaking confusion may require stepping back long enough to regain equilibrium. Rest can be strategic. Silence can be restorative. When your nervous system settles, your thoughts become more organized. Emotional regulation is not separate from spiritual clarity, it supports it. A calm mind processes direction more accurately than an agitated one. Confusion can also stem from unresolved identity. If you are unsure of who you are, every option feels unstable. You may shift goals frequently because you lack a fixed anchor. Breaking confusion begins with strengthening identity. When you know your values, your mission, and your priorities, decisions filter themselves. You no longer chase every opportunity because you measure them against purpose. Identity simplifies complexity. There is also the role of discipline. Indecision often persists because of avoidance. You postpone difficult choices, hoping clarity will appear without effort. But breaking confusion may require intentional evaluation, writing down options, seeking wise counsel, weighing consequences thoughtfully. Clarity sometimes emerges through structured reflection. Discipline organizes scattered thoughts into coherent insight. Breaking confusion at crossroads also involves trusting your internal witness. After prayer, reflection, and counsel, there comes a moment to choose. Endless reconsideration can reopen uncertainty. At some point, you must act on conviction. Action stabilizes direction. Once you commit, your focus shifts from analysis to execution. This shift strengthens confidence. It reinforces trust in your ability to discern. Confusion dissipates when you simplify priorities. If everything feels urgent, nothing is clear. Breaking confusion may require eliminating distractions that compete for attention. You may need to say no to good opportunities to protect better ones. You may need to reduce commitments to regain clarity. Simplification is not limitation, it is concentration of energy. Focus sharpens direction. Patience also dismantles confusion. Some clarity matures over time. Forcing immediate answers can intensify frustration. When you allow space for reflection without panic, insight often surfaces naturally. Patience creates room for understanding to settle. It prevents impulsive decisions driven by discomfort. Waiting with expectancy is different from waiting with anxiety. As confusion breaks, confidence begins to rebuild. You notice steadiness replacing restlessness. You sense alignment where there was once tension. Your thoughts become less fragmented. You recognize that clarity is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet assurance. The noise diminishes, the pressure decreases. Direction feels coherent. Breaking the spirit of confusion restores mental order, renews confidence in decision-making, and reestablishes your capacity to move forward with conviction at every crossroads that demands faithful and courageous response. Confidence in divine direction is not arrogance. It is assurance rooted in alignment. It is the settled conviction that when God speaks, his instruction carries wisdom beyond your perspective. Many people hesitate not because they lack ability, but because they question whether they have heard correctly. This hesitation breeds delay, and delay often invites doubt. Confidence in divine direction silences the cycle of overthinking and replaces it with steady obedience. It does not require that you understand every detail. It requires that you trust the one who does. Hesitation often disguises itself as caution. You tell yourself you are being wise, but in reality, you are postponing movement because you fear uncertainty. Confidence does not eliminate uncertainty. It strengthens your resolve within it. When you are confident in divine direction, you do not need repeated confirmations to validate what has already been spoken. You may seek counsel, but you are not swayed by every differing opinion. Your conviction becomes anchored. This anchoring stabilizes your emotions and prevents you from drifting between choices. Overthinking is one of the greatest enemies of confident obedience. The mind replays possibilities, imagines worst-case scenarios, and searches for flawless conditions. But divine direction often requires stepping forward before conditions feel perfect. Confidence quiets the internal debate. It reminds you that clarity does not mean absence of risk. It means presence of purpose. You may still feel stretched, but you are no longer paralyzed. Movement replaces rumination. Confidence in divine direction also reshapes how you interpret opposition. When challenges arise, you do not immediately assume you measured. Resistance does not equal misalignment. Sometimes opposition confirms that you are moving in the right direction. Confidence prevents you from retreating at the first sign of difficulty. It allows you to differentiate between constructive correction and distracting criticism. You evaluate feedback without surrendering conviction. This confidence grows through relationship. The more you witness God's faithfulness in past decisions, the stronger your present trust becomes. Reflection reinforces assurance. When you recall moments where obedience led to growth, provision, or unexpected favor, your faith deepens. Confidence is cumulative. Each testimony strengthens the next step. You begin to recognize patterns of guidance. You see how delays protected you. You see how redirections refined you. Memory becomes fuel for courage. Confidence also requires internal agreement. If part of you remains divided, hesitation persists. Wholehearted commitment strengthens momentum. Once you have prayed, discerned, and evaluated, there comes a moment to agree internally with the direction received. This agreement eliminates double-mindedness. It consolidates your focus. When your thoughts, emotions, and will align with conviction, your energy becomes concentrated rather than scattered. Bold obedience flows naturally from confidence. You stop seeking excessive reassurance. You act with decisiveness. This does not mean recklessness, it means readiness. You understand that obedience often unlocks the next layer of revelation. Waiting for full clarity before taking the first step can stall progress. Confidence empowers you to move with what you know. It trusts that additional guidance will meet you along the path. Fear of failure often undermines confidence. You may worry about public perception, financial risk, or personal disappointment, but confidence in divine direction reframes failure. It understands that obedience is success regardless of outcome. Even if results differ from expectation, growth still occurs. Lessons refine strategy, experience strengthens discernment. Confidence removes the pressure of perfection and replaces it with commitment to faithfulness. Comparison can also erode assurance. Watching others move faster or appear more certain may trigger self-doubt. Confidence resists this trap. It recognizes that divine direction is personal. Your timeline is tailored to your preparation. Your assignments are distinct. Measuring your progress against someone else's journey creates unnecessary insecurity. Confidence keeps your focus inward and upward rather than outward. Another aspect of confidence is resilience. There will be moments when clarity feels tested. Circumstances may not immediately align with promise. During these seasons, confidence steadies your heart. It prevents emotional swings based on temporary setbacks. It reminds you that direction is not invalidated by delay. Resilience protects conviction from erosion. Confidence in divine direction also influences communication. When you speak about your plans, your tone reflects assurance rather than uncertainty. You do not over-explain to gain approval. You do not diminish your vision to avoid criticism. Your words carry calm authority. This calmness attracts trust. People respond differently when they sense stability in your decisions. Discipline reinforces confidence. Acting consistently in alignment with your convictions strengthens self-trust. Each completed step builds momentum. Each fulfilled commitment reinforces reliability. Confidence grows when your actions reflect your beliefs. Inconsistency breeds doubt, but disciplined follow-through solidifies assurance. There is also a spiritual boldness that accompanies confidence. You begin to pray differently. Your declarations shift from tentative request to authoritative agreement with divine will. You approach opportunities with expectancy rather than anxiety. Your posture changes. You carry yourself with quiet certainty. This internal shift influences external outcomes. Confidence does not eliminate the need for humility. It remains teachable. It welcomes refinement without collapsing into insecurity. When correction comes, confidence evaluates it without defensiveness. It adjusts where necessary, but does not abandon core conviction. This balance preserves growth without destabilizing direction. As confidence strengthens, decision-making accelerates. You spend less time wavering. You conserve energy previously lost to indecision. Your focus sharpens. Your productivity increases. Confidence simplifies complexity because you are not constantly second-guessing yourself. You move forward with steady determination. In moments of silence, when external validation is absent, confidence sustains you. It whispers reassurance when applause is missing. It anchors you when outcomes are still unfolding. It reminds you of the foundation beneath your steps. Confidence in divine direction transforms hesitation into bold obedience, replaces overthinking with action, and stabilizes your journey with unwavering trust that the one who guided you will sustain you as you continue to move according to his purpose and timing. Prophetic precision for this season requires more than inspiration, it requires accuracy. It is the ability to discern not only what God is saying, but when he is saying it and how it applies to your present moment. A word that is accurate but mistimed can create frustration. An instruction that is clear but misapplied can produce unnecessary detours. Prophetic precision aligns revelation with timing, context, and assignment. It narrows broad impressions into specific directions so that movement becomes intentional rather than impulsive. Every season carries unique demands. What was effective in a previous chapter may not be sufficient now. Strategies evolve, relationships shift, responsibilities expand. Without prophetic precision, you may attempt to reuse outdated methods for new challenges. Precision recognizes transitions. It senses when grace has shifted from one assignment to another. It detects when a door has quietly closed even if familiarity tempts you to remain. This awareness prevents stagnation and positions you for advancement. In relationships, prophetic precision protects emotional investment. Not every connection is meant for permanence. Some people are seasonal, assigned for growth, collaboration, or refinement. Precision discerns whether a relationship is covenantal or temporary. It prevents overcommitting where boundaries are necessary. It also prevents withdrawing where perseverance is required. You begin to recognize alignment in values, vision, and spiritual momentum. You sense when conversations cultivate purpose and when they subtly erode it. In assignments, prophetic precision sharpens focus. Opportunities may appear attractive, but not all are aligned with your calling. Precision filters invitations through purpose. It asks whether this task strengthens your primary mission or distracts from it. It evaluates the cost of time and energy. It measures potential impact against long-term vision. This clarity simplifies decisions. Instead of chasing multiple directions, you concentrate on what truly matters. Financial decisions also benefit from prophetic precision. Investments, partnerships, and expenditures require discernment beyond surface appeal. Precision senses whether a financial move is strategic or reactive. It distinguishes between urgency driven by fear and action guided by wisdom. It recognizes when to conserve resources and when to sow boldly. This balance preserves stability while enabling growth. Prophetic precision for this season also involves understanding your capacity. Growth often invites expansion, but expansion without preparation can overwhelm. Precision evaluates readiness. It acknowledges strengths while identifying areas requiring development. It prevents premature exposure that could damage credibility. It encourages preparation before promotion. When you move in alignment with your level of maturity, you sustain momentum. Timing is central to precision. There are moments to speak and moments to remain silent, moments to advance and moments to observe. Precision senses divine rhythm. It recognizes that impatience can distort direction. Acting too soon may create resistance. Waiting too long may miss opportunity. Discernment of timing transforms ordinary decisions into strategic moves. It aligns your actions with unfolding circumstances in a way that appears seamless. Prophetic precision also refines communication. When clarity increases, your words become more intentional. You articulate vision with coherence. You avoid vague declarations and embrace specificity. Precision in speech influences influence. It builds trust because people understand your direction. Ambiguity diminishes and alignment strengthens. There is also a pruning aspect to precision. As seasons change, certain habits, commitments, or associations may require release. Pruning is not punishment, it is preparation. Removing excess creates room for fruitfulness. Precision identifies what must be trimmed to protect growth. It requires courage to let go of what once felt secure. Yet this release often precedes expansion. Prophetic precision demands attentiveness. Subtle shifts in environment, emotion, and opportunity carry signals. If you are distracted, you may overlook these cues. Attentiveness sharpens perception. It allows you to notice patterns. It helps you connect seemingly unrelated events into coherent insight. Over time, this attentiveness strengthens intuition rooted in spiritual awareness. Precision also guards against burnout. When you operate outside of season, you expend energy inefficiently. Effort increases while results diminish. Prophetic precision directs energy toward fertile ground. It prevents scattering your focus across too many endeavors. Concentrated effort yields measurable progress. Humility sustains precision. Recognizing that you are still learning keeps your perception adaptable. When new information emerges, humility allows adjustment without insecurity. Precision does not mean rigidity, it means responsiveness. It adapts strategy while preserving purpose. In moments of uncertainty, prophetic precision steadies your steps. Even if the entire path is not visible, you sense coherence in the next instruction. That coherence reduces anxiety. It clarifies priorities. It anchors decisions in conviction rather than convenience. You become less reactive to trends and more responsive to truth. As precision sharpens, confidence deepens. You stop drifting between possibilities. You move deliberately. Your calendar reflects intention. Your relationships reflect alignment. Your investments reflect strategy. The scattered energy of previous seasons consolidates into focused momentum. Prophetic precision for this season transforms general faith into specific action. It translates vision into measurable steps. It aligns spiritual insight with practical execution. It refines your sensitivity to timing, strengthens your discernment in relationships and assignments, concentrates your energy on purpose-driven pursuits, and positions you to navigate this season with strategic clarity, disciplined focus, and unwavering alignment with the direction unfolding before you. Beloved, this is not just another Tuesday. This is a divine interruption. This is a prophetic appointment. It is 24 February 2026. And heaven has scheduled a strategic invasion into every repetitive pattern, every sabotaging cycle, every inherited limitation that has tried to script your future without your permission. Today is not casual. Today is confrontational. Today we stand at the intersection of destiny and decision. There are cycles that have run in families for generations. Cycles of lack, cycles of delay, cycles of broken relationships, cycles of fear, inconsistency, self-doubt, and silent battles no one talks about. But hear me clearly. Cycles only continue when they are unchallenged. Patterns only persist when they are tolerated. And today, we revoke permission. Today, we serve notice to every recurring struggle that has overstayed its welcome. You are not the victim of repetition. You are the interruption. You were not born to manage dysfunction. You were born to dismantle it. You were not an accident in your bloodline. You are a divine strategy planted in your lineage to shift momentum. What tried to defeat your mother will not defeat you. What silenced your father will not silence you. What limited past generations will not limit your future. The pattern stops here. The cycle breaks here. The curse expires here. This is an atomic prayer, meaning we are not whispering wishes. We are issuing decrees. We are legislating from a higher realm. We are aligning our words with heaven's authority and enforcing spiritual change in the earth. When you pray today, you are not begging. You are breaking. You are not hoping. You are commanding. You are not reacting. You are restructuring your spiritual environment. Some of you have felt resistance because when a cycle is about to break, pressure intensifies. When generational patterns sense eviction, they push back. But that pressure you've been feeling is not proof of defeat. It is confirmation of disruption. Something is shifting. Something is cracking. Something is collapsing in the unseen realm. So I need you to position yourself with expectation. Lift your faith. Engage your authority. Refuse passivity. Refuse repetition. Refuse to rehearse the same year in a different calendar. This is your moment to draw a prophetic line in the sand and declare, it may have started before me, but it will not survive me. Today, on this 24th day of February, we stand as cycle breakers, pattern destroyers, and history makers. And as we enter into this atomic prayer, understand this: when this prayer concludes, The repetition that haunted you will no longer have legal access to your tomorrow. This ends with you. You are not a coincidence in your bloodline. You are not random, accidental, or misplaced in the timeline of your family's history. You are the divine interruption. Before you ever took your first breath, heaven had already marked you as a strategic insertion into a narrative that needed disruption. Where others adapted, you question. Where others settled, you resist. Where others repeated patterns, something inside you rises up and says, this cannot continue. That holy dissatisfaction is not rebellion, it is revelation. It is the evidence that you were wired differently because you were assigned differently. Every family has cycles. Some are visible, others are subtle. Cycles of scarcity that show up in chronic financial struggle. Cycles of broken relationships that repeat in different forms, but with the same painful outcome. Cycles of fear that disguise themselves as caution. Cycles of self-sabotage that appear right when progress is within reach. These patterns can feel normal because they are familiar. They can feel inevitable because they are historical. But normal does not mean ordained, and historical does not mean prophetic. Just because something has been repeated does not mean it has been authorized. You were placed in the line to interrupt what was never meant to continue. An interruption changes the flow of momentum. It stops what was moving unchecked. It challenges what was operating automatically. When you step into your awareness, you begin to see that the struggles you face are not just personal, they are patterned. And when you recognize the pattern, you expose its weakness. Cycles thrive in silence. Patterns gain strength when no one questions them. But the moment you become conscious of the repetition, the moment you say, I see this, you disrupt its invisibility. Awareness is the first act of spiritual resistance. Being the interruption is not always comfortable. It often feels isolating. You may be the only one in your family who thinks differently about money, relationships, faith, discipline, or purpose. You may be the only one who refuses to normalize chaos. You may be misunderstood because you are unwilling to participate in what has always been done. But your difference is not disloyalty. Your growth is not arrogance. Your refusal to repeat dysfunction is not dishonor. It is assignment. It is calling. It is divine strategy expressed through your decisions. There is a reason you feel the weight of responsibility. There is a reason mediocrity agitates you. There is a reason you cannot comfortably stay in cycles that others have accepted. That discomfort is prophetic. It is the evidence that you were not designed to maintain the pattern, but to dismantle it. Interruptions do not ask for permission. They do not wait for consensus. They do not require applause. They simply show up and shift the atmosphere. When you choose healing over denial, you interrupt. When you choose discipline over impulse, you interrupt. When you choose forgiveness over bitterness, you interrupt. When you choose vision over victimhood, you interrupt. You may have inherited tendencies, but you did not inherit a mandate to continue them. You may have grown up watching certain behaviors modeled, but observation does not equal obligation. The past may explain you, but it does not define you. You are not condemned to replay the same scripts. You are empowered to rewrite them. The interruption begins the moment you decide that awareness will lead to action. It begins when you stop saying, "This is just how we are," and start declaring, "This is how it used to be." To interrupt a cycle requires courage because cycles resist disruption. Patterns defend themselves. When you begin to shift, you may encounter internal resistance in the form of fear and doubt. You may hear the whisper that says, "Who do you think you are?" You may feel the pressure of expectations that try to pull you back into familiar roles. But resistance is confirmation that something is being challenged. The pressure is evidence that the interruption is working. Change always confronts what has been comfortable. Growth always unsettles what has been predictable. You are the interruption in your thinking. You are the interruption in your emotional responses. You are the interruption in your family's narrative about what is possible. When you invest differently, speak differently, love differently, and pray differently, you send a signal into your lineage that something new has begun. The interruption may start with one decision, one boundary, one disciplined habit, one courageous conversation. It may not look dramatic at first, but every consistent choice creates a new pattern. Every repeated act of alignment builds a new cycle. Just as dysfunction was formed through repetition, breakthrough is established through repetition. Your presence in this moment in time is not accidental. You are alive in this generation because you carry the capacity to do what previous generations could not. You have access to knowledge they did not have, exposure they did not experience, and insight they did not encounter. That access is not just for your comfort, it is for your commission. You are equipped to see what they could not see and to confront what they could not confront. You are not dishonoring them by going further. You are fulfilling what they hoped for but could not reach. Being the interruption means you refuse to rehearse trauma as identity. It means you acknowledge pain without allowing it to define your future. It means you seek healing even when others avoid it. It means you confront patterns in your own behavior with honesty instead of blame. The interruption is not only external, it is internal. It requires you to examine your reactions, your habits, your language, and your mindset. It demands that you ask difficult questions and embrace uncomfortable growth. But every moment of self-confrontation is a step toward collective transformation. When you break a cycle, you do more than change your own trajectory. You alter the possibilities for those who come after you. Your children, your community, those connected to you will benefit from the new pattern you establish. They will inherit not just your DNA, but your decisions. They will step into an environment shaped by your courage. The interruption you embody becomes the foundation for their expansion. What you refuse to tolerate becomes the standard they accept as normal. You are the divine interruption because you have the power to pause, to evaluate, to decide differently. You are not bound to automatic responses. You are not enslaved to inherited limitations. You are conscious, aware, and capable of transformation. Every time you choose growth over gravity, you prove that cycles are not sovereign. Every time you choose purpose over passivity, you demonstrate that patterns can be broken. Every time you align your actions with your higher calling, you reinforce the reality that history does not have the final word over your destiny. Cycles continue when they are tolerated. What you permit, you perpetuate. What you excuse, you empower. Every repeated pattern in your life survives because at some level, it has been allowed to survive. It may not have been consciously approved, but it has not been forcefully rejected. Tolerance is quiet agreement. It is the silent contract that says, this is inconvenient, but I will adjust. And every time you adjust to dysfunction instead of confronting it, you reinforce its right to remain. Cycles are subtle architects. They build strongholds through repetition, not drama. A negative thought repeated daily becomes a mindset. A small compromise repeated weekly becomes a character flaw. A tolerated disrespect repeated monthly becomes a relational pattern. What begins as an isolated event becomes an established rhythm. And rhythms are powerful because they feel natural. When something feels normal, it rarely feels urgent to change. That is how cycles survive. They disguise themselves as personality, as culture, as tradition, as just the way things are. But normal is not always healthy. Familiar is not always functional. Just because something has been consistent does not mean it has been constructive. You may have grown up in an environment where yelling was normal, where scarcity thinking was normal, where inconsistency was normal, where emotional avoidance was normal. You may have internalized behaviors simply because you saw them modeled repeatedly, and over time, tolerance turned into identity. You stopped questioning what you were experiencing because it was all you knew. Tolerance is dangerous because it dulls discernment. The first time something happens, it shocks you. The second time, it concerns you. The third time, you start explaining it away. By the 10th time, you are no longer surprised. You have adjusted your expectations downward to accommodate what should have been confronted. When standards drop, cycles rise. When accountability weakens, patterns strengthen. Every time you say, it's not that bad, you lower the bar for what you will accept in your life. Cycles of lack continue when you tolerate poor stewardship. Cycles of broken relationships continue when you tolerate unresolved trauma. Cycles of stagnation continue when you tolerate procrastination. Cycles of insecurity continue when you tolerate negative self-talk. There is always a point of permission, a moment where the cycle gains access because it was not denied entry. And the longer it remains unchallenged, the more authority it assumes. Eventually, what you tolerated begins to control you. Tolerance often hides behind compassion. You tell yourself you are being patient. You tell yourself you are being understanding. You tell yourself you are giving people grace. And while grace is powerful, grace without boundaries becomes permission. Compassion without accountability becomes enablement. You can love someone and still refuse to tolerate destructive behavior. You can understand someone's pain and still require change. Tolerance is not the same as love. Sometimes love is the very reason you must confront what has been allowed. There are internal cycles that continue because you tolerate your own excuses. You know the areas where you lack discipline. You know the habits that sabotage your progress. You know the conversations you avoid. You know the risks you refuse to take. And yet you have developed sophisticated explanations for why you remain the same. This is just how I am. I've always struggled with this. It runs in my family. These statements feel harmless, but they are agreements with repetition. The moment you label a weakness as permanent, you remove your responsibility to challenge it. Cycles feed on comfort. They rely on your preference for the familiar over the unknown. Breaking a pattern requires effort, and effort can feel overwhelming. It is easier to tolerate a manageable frustration than to initiate a disruptive change. It is easier to complain about the cycle than to confront the work required to end it. But comfort has a cost. The price of avoiding discomfort today is prolonged dysfunction tomorrow. What you refuse to challenge now will demand greater confrontation later. Tolerance also operates in your language. The way you speak about your life reinforces what you accept. If you constantly say, "Nothing ever works out for me," you tolerate disappointment as identity. If you say, "I'm just bad with money," you tolerate financial mismanagement as destiny. If you say, "All my relationships fail," you tolerate relational dysfunction as fate. Words create mental boundaries. And when you consistently verbalize limitation, you build walls around your potential. Cycles are strengthened by the narratives you repeat. The first step to ending a cycle is to withdraw your tolerance. You must identify what you have normalized that should have been challenged. You must examine the patterns you have excused. You must become honest about the areas where you have settled. This is not about self-condemnation. It is about self-awareness. Awareness exposes the agreement. Once you see where you have tolerated what undermines you, you can revoke that permission. You can raise your standards. You can redefine what is acceptable in your life. Raising your standards will feel uncomfortable because it disrupts established rhythms. When you stop tolerating lateness, people accustomed to your flexibility will resist. When you stop tolerating disrespect, those who benefited from your silence will push back. When you stop tolerating your own procrastination, your excuses will grow louder. Resistance is inevitable because cycles do not surrender quietly. They rely on your fatigue. They rely on your fear of conflict. They rely on your desire to keep peace at the expense of progress. But peace without progress is stagnation. Harmony without health is illusion. Real transformation requires confrontation. It requires you to say, "This may have been common, but it will not continue." It requires you to recognize that you are not obligated to maintain what diminishes you. Every time you enforce a new boundary, you weaken an old pattern. Every time you choose discipline over impulse, you interrupt repetition. Every time you refuse to entertain a limiting belief, you shrink the cycle's influence. Cycles continue when they are tolerated, but they collapse when they are consistently opposed. Not with one emotional reaction, but with repeated intentional action. Change is not a single decision. It is a sustained refusal to go back. You must become intolerant of what threatens your growth, intolerant of excuses, intolerant of self-sabotage, intolerant of mediocrity disguised as comfort, intolerant of narratives that keep you small. The same power that once tolerated dysfunction can now enforce transformation. The same consistency that once maintained a negative cycle can now establish a positive one. What you repeatedly allow defines your reality. What you repeatedly reject reshapes your future. Inherited patterns are not inevitable outcomes. Just because something ran in your bloodline does not mean it has the right to run your life. Just because you witness certain behaviors growing up does not mean you are sentenced to repeat them. History may explain your starting point, but it does not dictate your destination. You may have inherited tendencies, exposures, and environments, but you did not inherit a permanent verdict. There is a difference between influence and identity, between exposure and entitlement, between familiarity and fate. Many people confuse repetition with inevitability. When they see the same struggles appear across generations, they assume it is destiny. Financial instability, broken marriages, emotional distance, addiction, fear-based decision-making, limited education, chronic illness thinking. When these patterns appear consistently, they can start to feel prophetic. But repetition is not prophecy. It is simply unchallenged momentum. Patterns persist not because they are unbreakable, but because they are unexamined. And what goes unexamined often goes uninterrupted. You may have inherited a certain temperament, but you did not inherit the obligation to remain undisciplined. You may have inherited trauma responses, but you did not inherit the requirement to live unhealed. You may have inherited scarcity thinking, but you did not inherit the command to stay limited. Genetics may load the gun, but choices pull the trigger. Environment may shape your early thinking, but awareness reshapes your later decisions. The moment you become conscious of a pattern, you introduce the possibility of change. There is power in recognizing what was modeled for you without allowing it to master you. You can acknowledge that anger was common in your household without embracing anger as your personality. You can admit that financial mismanagement was normalized without surrendering to it as your financial future. You can accept that emotional suppression was taught without choosing to live emotionally disconnected. Recognition is not resignation. Awareness is not agreement. You can see the pattern clearly and still decide it stops with you. Inherited patterns often hide in language. We've always struggled with this. The men in our family are like that. The women in our family never. That's just in our blood. These statements may sound harmless, but they are subtle declarations of inevitability. They frame limitation as identity. They turn history into destiny. And when destiny is framed as fixed, effort feels pointless. Why try to change what you believe is permanent? Why fight what you assume is encoded? But the truth is that belief systems are more powerful than bloodlines. What you consistently believe about yourself will shape your behavior more than what you inherited biologically. Patterns are passed down not only through DNA, but through observation, imitation, and repetition. Children absorb what they see long before they question it. They internalize emotional responses, communication styles, financial habits, relational expectations. And unless those patterns are intentionally confronted, they continue by default. Default is powerful. It requires no effort. It demands no reflection. It simply repeats what was. But default is not destiny. It is just the absence of deliberate change. You are not powerless against your history. You are positioned to evaluate it. You can study your family's narrative and identify both strengths and weaknesses. You can honor the resilience without repeating the dysfunction. You can celebrate the sacrifices without duplicating the struggles. You can appreciate the survival while pursuing transformation. Breaking a pattern does not dishonor your past. It fulfills its highest hope. Many previous generations endured what they did so that you would have the opportunity to do better. Your growth is not betrayal, it is advancement. There may be areas where you feel the weight of familiarity pulling at you, moments when you respond in ways that sound like echoes of what you grew up hearing, times when fear rises in a way that feels inherited. That awareness is not condemnation, it is invitation. Invitation to pause, invitation to choose differently, invitation to disrupt the automatic response. The more conscious you become of your triggers, the more power you gain over them. Automatic behavior loses strength when it is observed. Unconscious repetition weakens when exposed to intentional thought. Inherited patterns are not inevitable because you possess agency. You have the ability to decide what continues and what concludes. You have the power to seek knowledge that previous generations did not have access to. You can pursue healing, therapy, mentorship, spiritual growth, financial education, emotional intelligence. Access changes outcomes. Exposure expands options. What was once unknown can now be learned. What was once hidden can now be understood. The tools available to you are evidence that repetition is not required. Breaking inherited patterns requires courage because it means stepping into unfamiliar territory. It means becoming the first in your family to think differently, to invest differently, to love differently, to communicate differently. It may feel lonely at times. It may feel like you are navigating without a blueprint. But unfamiliar does not mean impossible. It simply means new. And new paths are created by those willing to walk where others have not. Every first step feels uncertain until it becomes a foundation. There will be moments when you are tempted to excuse your behavior by pointing to your background. It is easier to say, "This is how I was raised," than to say, "This is what I am choosing." Ownership is empowering, but it is also demanding. When you accept that inherited patterns are not inevitable, you remove your most convenient excuse. You can no longer hide behind history. You must confront your habits. You must examine your decisions. You must acknowledge your role in either continuing or breaking the cycle. The power to shift a lineage begins with personal responsibility. Not responsibility for what happened to you, but responsibility for what you do next. You did not choose your starting conditions, but you can choose your direction. You cannot rewrite your childhood, but you can rewrite your response. You cannot alter the past decisions of those before you, but you can alter the trajectory of those after you. Each intentional choice becomes a new imprint. Each disciplined action becomes a new example. Each healed wound becomes a new inheritance. When you decide that inherited patterns are not inevitable outcomes, you step into authorship. You move from being a product of your environment to being a producer of new environments. You begin to understand that history may influence you, but it does not imprison you. You can trace the roots without being trapped by them. You can acknowledge the branches without being limited to their reach. You are more than a continuation of what was. You are a catalyst for what can be. The moment you believe that change is possible within you, you open the door for change beyond you. Pressure is proof of imminent breakthrough. When something is about to shift, resistance intensifies. When a cycle is about to break, tension rises. When you are approaching a new level, the weight often feels heavier than ever before. Many people misinterpret pressure as punishment, as failure, as a sign to retreat. But pressure is not always an indicator that you are off course. Often it is evidence that you are directly confronting what once controlled you. Think about how pressure works in the natural world. Diamonds are formed under extreme pressure. Muscles grow through resistance. Oil is extracted through compression. Expansion in one area often requires constriction in another. The discomfort you feel is not random, it is transformational. Something is being reshaped within you. Old mindsets are being challenged. Old habits are being stretched. Old patterns are being confronted. And confrontation creates friction. Friction creates heat. Heat signals change. When you decide to break a cycle, you disrupt what has been comfortable. You challenge patterns that have operated unchecked for years. The moment you set a new boundary, the moment you enforce a new discipline, the moment you raise your standards, pressure appears. Not because you are wrong, but because the old system is resisting replacement. Pressure is the pushback of what refuses to leave quietly. It is the reaction of familiarity when faced with transformation. There's a specific kind of pressure that comes when you are close to breakthrough. It feels concentrated. It feels targeted. You may notice old temptations resurfacing. You may feel fatigue more intensely. You may encounter unexpected obstacles. This is not coincidence. It is the final attempt of the cycle to maintain control. Patterns fight hardest right before they collapse. The closer you get to freedom, the more aggressively the old narrative tries to reassert itself. If you misinterpret this moment, you may retreat just before victory. Pressure exposes what is inside you. When everything is calm, your weaknesses can remain hidden. But when stress increases, your internal structure is revealed. Are you rooted in conviction or convenience? Are you disciplined or reactive? Are you committed or conditional? Pressure reveals the depth of your growth. It shows you whether your transformation is superficial or substantial. And this revelation is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to refine you. Refinement requires heat. Impurities rise to the surface when exposed to fire. In the same way, unresolved fears, insecurities, and doubts surface when you are under pressure. You may suddenly become aware of limiting beliefs you did not realize were still influencing you. You may recognize emotional triggers you thought you had mastered. This awareness is not regression, it is purification. You cannot eliminate what you cannot see. Pressure forces hidden patterns into visibility so they can be addressed. Many people abandon their breakthrough because they mistake pressure for defeat. They assume that if the resistance is strong, the vision must be wrong. But the opposite is often true. The greater the assignment, the greater the opposition. The larger the breakthrough, the stronger the resistance. Pressure is not always a sign to stop. Sometimes it is a signal to stand. It is the confirmation that your actions are disrupting something significant. Consider how birth works. Before new life emerges, there are contractions. The intensity increases. The intervals shorten. The discomfort becomes undeniable. Yet those contractions are not the end. They are the precursor. They signal that something new is about to enter the world. In the same way, the contractions in your life may feel overwhelming, but they are announcing expansion. They are preparing you for emergence. You are not being crushed. You are being positioned. Pressure also builds capacity. If everything in your life remained easy, your strength would remain limited. Resistance forces you to grow. It demands new strategies, deeper faith, sharper focus, greater discipline. The weight you carry today is developing the endurance you will need tomorrow. The challenges you navigate now are preparing you for responsibilities you have not yet encountered. Breakthrough without preparation would be sabotage. Pressure ensures you are fortified before you are elevated. There is a temptation to escape pressure through distraction, to numb it, to avoid it, to return to familiar patterns that feel less demanding. But avoidance prolongs the process. When you resist the refinement, you extend the season. When you confront it, you accelerate it. Pressure is not permanent. It is transitional. It exists to move you from one level to another. But transition requires participation. You must lean into the growth instead of running from it. The key is perspective. If you view pressure as proof of inadequacy, you will shrink. If you view pressure as proof of imminent breakthrough, you will stand firm. Perspective transforms experience. The same weight that feels like destruction can become development when understood correctly. The same challenge that seems like opposition can become opportunity when interpreted through growth. You may feel like everything is pressing in at once: responsibilities, expectations, internal battles, external resistance. It may seem like too much, but pressure has a limit. It cannot exceed your capacity to endure and expand. You are stronger than you realize. The very fact that you are still standing under the weight is evidence of resilience. The very fact that you are still pursuing change is proof of commitment. Pressure has not broken you because it was never designed to. It was designed to shape you. Every time you choose discipline under pressure, you reinforce your transformation. Every time you maintain integrity under pressure, you strengthen your character. Every time you hold your boundaries under pressure, you solidify your growth. These moments may feel small, but they are cumulative. They are building a new foundation. They are reinforcing a new identity. They are establishing a new cycle. Breakthrough is rarely quiet. It is often preceded by noise, tension, and intensity. The final moments before a shift are usually the most uncomfortable. But discomfort is not destruction. It is preparation. It is alignment. It is the final refinement before release. When you feel the weight increase, when you sense the tension rising, understand that you may be closer than ever to the change you have been believing for. Pressure is not your enemy. It is the announcement that something is about to give way. Something is about to open. Something is about to shift in your favor. Prayer is a legislative act, not a passive ritual. It is not a weak whisper into the ceiling. It is not a routine recital of memorized words. It is not a spiritual formality designed to make you feel temporarily relieved. Prayer is authority in motion. It is alignment with divine order. It is the conscious decision to speak into chaos and demand that it reorganize itself according to a higher standard. When you understand prayer as legislation, you stop approaching it timidly and start engaging it strategically. Legislation establishes boundaries. It defines what is permitted and what is prohibited. It sets order where there would otherwise be disorder. In the same way, prayer sets spiritual parameters. It draws lines. It declares what will and will not continue. It announces alignment. When you pray, you are not merely expressing emotion. You are issuing decrees. You are taking a stand in the unseen realm and declaring that certain patterns no longer have authorization to operate in your life. Passive rituals require no expectation. They are performed out of habit, not conviction. They are spoken without engagement. But legislative prayer demands awareness. It requires you to know what you are confronting. It calls you to identify the cycle, the mindset, the limitation, and address it directly. You cannot legislate what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot enforce change in areas you are unwilling to examine. Effective prayer begins with clarity. When you see prayer as legislation, your language shifts. You move from hoping to declaring, from wishing to commanding, from vague requests to specific decrees. You begin to speak with precision. You address the fear instead of dancing around it. You confront the stagnation instead of complaining about it. You call out the cycle by name. You do not negotiate with what needs to be dismantled. You enforce a new reality through intentional words aligned with conviction. Legislation also requires consistency. A law written but never enforced loses its power. In the same way, a prayer spoken once without follow-through becomes a fleeting moment instead of a transformative act. Legislative prayer is reinforced by daily alignment. If you decree discipline, you must practice discipline. If you declare freedom, you must reject what enslaves you. If you speak peace, you must refuse to entertain chaos. Your actions become the enforcement mechanism of your words. Prayer as legislation shifts your posture from victim to authority. Instead of reacting to circumstances, you begin to address them. Instead of being overwhelmed by patterns, you confront them. Instead of tolerating cycles, you revoke their access. You understand that silence can be agreement. You recognize that avoidance can be permission. So you choose to speak, you choose to declare, you choose to interrupt what has been operating unchecked. There is power in spoken alignment. Words frame perception. Perception shapes behavior. Behavior forms patterns. When you pray with intention, you are restructuring your internal narrative. You are rewriting the script that has governed your responses. You are reminding yourself of who you are and what you stand for. Legislative prayer is not only about changing external circumstances, it is about fortifying internal conviction. It strengthens your resolve. It sharpens your focus. It clarifies your identity. Many people approach prayer as escape rather than engagement. They use it as a temporary refuge from pressure without confronting the source of the pressure. But legislative prayer is confrontational. It does not avoid tension. It addresses it. It does not deny reality. It reshapes it. It does not simply soothe the emotions. It establishes order. When you pray legislatively, you are not asking to be removed from the battle. You are declaring authority within it. There is intentionality required in this kind of prayer. You must know what you are building. You must know what you are dismantling. You must know what you are aligning with. It is not random language thrown into the atmosphere. It is strategic declaration rooted in purpose. It is the deliberate decision to speak life where death has lingered, clarity where confusion has persisted, discipline where inconsistency has dominated. Prayer is not passive because transformation is not passive. Change requires participation. When you speak, you activate awareness. When you declare, you reinforce belief. When you legislate, you establish direction. Every intentional prayer strengthens your internal alignment with the outcome you seek. It conditions your mind to expect breakthrough. It trains your spirit to stand firm. It builds resilience in the face of resistance. Legislative prayer also demands responsibility. You cannot decree growth while resisting effort. You cannot command peace while entertaining conflict. You cannot declare abundance while practicing mismanagement. The authority of your words is amplified by the integrity of your actions. When your behavior aligns with your declarations, momentum builds. When your life reflects your prayer, patterns begin to shift. There's a difference between repetition and reinforcement. Ritual repeats words without expectation. Legislation reinforces intention with consistency. When you wake up and speak over your day with clarity, you are setting parameters. When you confront fear with declaration, you are redefining your response. When you address limitation with conviction, you are reshaping possibility. Each intentional prayer becomes a building block in a new structure. You are not powerless in your environment. You are not at the mercy of every circumstance. Legislative prayer reminds you that you have influence. It reminds you that your voice carries weight. It reminds you that silence is a choice and so is declaration. When you open your mouth with purpose, you shift your posture from passive observer to active participant in your transformation. The cycles that have persisted did so because they were unchallenged. The patterns that dominated did so because they were unaddressed. But when you begin to pray with authority, you introduce a new dynamic. You disrupt the status quo. You confront complacency. You replace vague hope with decisive declaration. And as you continue to legislate with clarity, consistency, and conviction, you reinforce a new order, a new standard, a new direction that refuses to bow to repetition and refuses to surrender to the familiar pattern that once dictated your outcomes. What started before you will not survive you. The patterns may be old, but they are not eternal. The cycles may be familiar, but they are not invincible. Just because something existed before you arrived does not mean it has the authority to outlast you. You are not a continuation of dysfunction. You are a confrontation to it. You are not here to maintain what broke others. You are here to break what maintained them. There are battles that began long before you were born. Mindsets that shaped generations, habits that went unchallenged, fears that were normalized, limitations that were accepted as destiny. You stepped into a story already in motion. But your arrival was not accidental. You carry a different awareness, a different exposure, a different level of access. And with that comes a different responsibility. You are not obligated to continue what you inherited. You are empowered to end it. Ending a cycle requires more than intention. It requires confrontation. You must be willing to look at what has been repeated and refuse to romanticize it. You must resist the temptation to excuse it simply because it is familiar. Familiarity can create false loyalty. You may feel guilty for wanting more than previous generations experienced. You may feel pressure to stay within the boundaries they never crossed. But growth is not betrayal. Advancement is not dishonor. You can respect your roots without remaining bound to their limitations. What started before you may feel bigger than you. It may feel entrenched, deeply woven into your family's identity. But longevity does not equal authority. Just because a pattern has existed for decades does not mean it is stronger than your decision to change. Momentum can be redirected. Direction can be altered. A single consistent choice can shift an entire trajectory. You may be the first to see the pattern clearly, and that clarity is power. You may encounter resistance when you choose to end what others tolerated. Some will question your new boundaries. Some will misunderstand your discipline. Some may even feel threatened by your transformation. When you break a pattern, you disrupt the comfort of those who adjusted to it. But discomfort is not a reason to retreat. It is evidence that something entrenched is being challenged. The very tension you feel is confirmation that the cycle recognizes its expiration date. Ending what started before you requires internal work. You cannot defeat externally what you still accommodate internally. If insecurity ran in your lineage, you must confront it in your own thinking. If avoidance was common, you must practice courage in your own decisions. If scarcity was normalized, you must cultivate abundance in your mindset. The battle is not only around you, it is within you. Every time you choose differently, you weaken the cycle's grip. There will be moments when you feel the weight of history pressing against your progress. Old habits will try to resurface. Familiar reactions will tempt you. Doubt will whisper that nothing truly changes. But change is not measured by absence of temptation. It is measured by consistency of response. The fact that you are aware of the pattern means you are already ahead of it. The fact that you are intentional about your decisions means you are already shifting it. You are not required to carry every burden that was handed to you. Some weights were passed down without question. Beliefs about what is possible. Narratives about who you are. Expectations about how far you can go. But inheritance is not obligation. You can lay down what does not align with your purpose. You can reject the scripts that shrink you. You can release the assumptions that confine you. What started before you does not have the right to define you. It takes courage to be the ending of something long-standing. It is easier to flow with what has always been than to stand against it. It is easier to repeat than to redefine. But you were not created for ease alone. You were created with the capacity to transform. Every disciplined choice you make becomes a declaration that the old cycle is losing ground. Every boundary you enforce becomes a statement that the pattern no longer controls the narrative. Ending a cycle also creates space. When you remove what no longer serves you, you make room for something new to emerge. New habits, new standards, new expectations, new examples. You are not just stopping something, you are starting something. You are establishing a new normal. You are modeling a different way. Those who come after you will benefit from the clarity you fought for. They will step into a reality shaped by your refusal to repeat. There may be days when progress feels slow, when the change is not dramatic, when the old pattern seems to linger at the edges. But endings are often gradual before they are visible. Foundations shift before structures fall. Decisions accumulate before results appear. Stay consistent, stay aware, stay intentional. The cycle weakens each time you choose growth over gravity. It loses strength each time you refuse to return to what once defined you. What started before you will not survive you because you are conscious. You are intentional. You are disciplined. You are aware of the pattern and unwilling to submit to it. The narrative shifts with your decisions. The trajectory changes with your actions. The story rewrites itself through your courage. You are not the extension of the struggle. You are the conclusion of it. You are the line drawn in the sand. You are the interruption that became an ending. And as you continue to stand firm in your convictions, to align your habits with your vision, to confront what once intimidated you, the old cycle finds no place to root, no space to expand, no permission to persist within the life you have chosen to redefine.